So I'm a millennial, my dad's a boomer, and there is a generation between us, but I forgot who they are.
Oh, don't say that. Don't say that. Don't.
Well, I'm just recognizing the fact that Gen X often gets left out. And as a reminder, we mentioned this in the last episode, but I'll mention it again. Go over to the EST podcast. I know that's a bit of a shameless plug because it's my other podcast, but we did a whole episode on Gen X. So we're not leaving you out. It's just it's my dad's leaving you out. I'm not. Josh and I at EST, we did our own.
I have been talking about Gen X before you were cool. I've been writing about demographic realities and generational realities. Don't give me that. Don't give me that.
You know, I also think it might be good for us to point out that you did write a book called The Bridger Generation, trying to name the millennials way back in the day. Credit for that.
How did that go?
It did not catch. It did not catch. It makes sense, but millennials ended up being the thing that people say.
Well, I alliterated. We had the builders and we had the boomers. And then I wanted the Gen X to be the busters and then the bridgers. It was a generation bust, but no generation wants to be called Buster Boy. So it did not work. So we're going to be talking about millennials. Fascinating research you have here about mobility of the millennials.
Let's just come right out and say it. Millennials are the least mobile of the last 4 generations.
Shocking.
People think that the younger generations are moving around a lot. They're not. And by great degrees, they're staying put. And you may find that surprising. We're going to talk about what's going on. We'll get to more of that here in just a moment, but I certainly want to thank our sponsor, Tyndale. And we mentioned this book on the last episode. I'm glad that we're able to promote it because it's just a fascinating idea. So let's talk about biographies. I like biographies. The most recent one I'm going to start one on Truman. I think he's an underrated president. I know that he's got some issues there, of course, but he's got a Florida connection. But I read a biography on Henrietta Mears. It was absolutely fascinating. But this biography is about somebody far better than Truman, somebody far better than Henrietta Mears. It's about Jesus. Whoever thought about doing a biography on Jesus? This is so cool. It's a captivating new book from Tyndale called God with Us. It's the account of Jesus' life, his teachings, his deeds, told entirely in the words of the 4 Gospels. What they've done is they've taken it together, taken it all, put it in a chronological narrative. It's like nothing that you've read. And even if you know the Bible well, this is worth your while. So this is the biography of the year in my mind. It may be the biography of all eternity.
Yes.
God with Us.
Yes, it is. And it comes straight from the autobiography, because if the Spirit inspired the Word, then that makes God the author of all Scripture, the Trinity in Scripture. So, we can go a lot of ways with this.
We could have a lot of fun with it, but what you really should do is just go get the book. So we've got a link in the show notes. God with Us, the biography of Jesus. I think it would make a great sermon series. I do that sometimes. I take a book and, I don't preach the book, of course, but sometimes books give you really good ideas for sermon series. I think this would be just right on the spot for doing something, preaching a series on the biography of Jesus according to the Gospels. Man, that sounds really fascinating to me. So
I like that. Yeah. Before we get to the content about the least mobile millennials, I want to just give a heads up to all of our listeners and viewers. I will be talking about Church Answers University at the end of this. Now, what's important about Church Answers University? Probably one of the fastest growing educational organizations, institutions around right now. It is incredible. More and more people are being trained for ministry and education by Church Answers University. It is a phenomenon. And we have been given 50% scholarships. We have been dedicated and just totally given to ROL listeners. So if you feel like you need to be trained for ministry, you're not able to go off and go to a typical formal education, listen for this. We're going to tell you how you can get, but there are only 5 of them, one of 5 scholarships. We're grateful that these scholarships have come in, but it's just for ROL listeners. We'll tell you how at the end of this podcast. Now, Sam, let's talk about the millennials and their mobility being down. When you gave me this information originally, I didn't fact check you, but I was very surprised to hear it.
I was surprised to see it. Now, here's the thing. We've been tracking mobility really since post-World War II. So, 1930s, 1940s is when the government started tracking a lot of this data. We don't have it back further, unfortunately. But so we're looking at really 4 generations here, as far back as we can go. So when you go back to the 1940s, about 1 in 5 people moved annually. So if you lived in a neighborhood, 20% of the neighborhood would turn over in that year. Very common. And, if you look at the builder generation, to use your generational terms, they moved around a lot. Now, I don't, there's a lot of, we could go into at length in terms of as why, talking, demography and sociology there. But now we're looking at people, it's like only 1 in 10 or 12 that are moving now.
Out of the millennial generation.
No, that's total. That's okay. That's all generations. And that includes retiring baby boomers who are moving at much greater rates. So if you break it down on a generational basis, you are seeing young people staying put. Now, a lot of it has to do with, affordability of housing, a lack of savings, student loan debt. They can't afford to move. So there's a lot of reasons why. But what it means for your church is that you're more likely to keep the young people in your community than you are the older people, unless you happen to be in a community that is a declining community and all the young people are leaving to find jobs elsewhere. That's certainly the case in some places. But in most places, it's the younger families that tend to stay put more.
Absolutely amazing.
Most people think it's the other way around. It's just absolutely fascinating to me. I'm a case in point. And you look at how much you moved, Dad, versus how much I moved, and you moved more than me. As a rule. All right. Jess is even less. Jess has picked a spot in Spring Hill. That's my brother, in case you're wondering who Jess is. Some random, comment about who's this Jess. We have to get him on the podcast at some point. He's chose Spring Hill, Tennessee. And he's just staying put.
Yep. He planted a church there, and when he planted a church, his youngest child, his daughter Collins, was a baby, a newborn, and he said, "I want to watch her graduate from high school here." And I believe it looks like it's going to happen. He'll probably watch Collins graduate from high school there. So it's an amazing thing to me. And Sam, here's the irony. I don't know if irony is a good word, but here's an amazing fact about our lives personally. You and Bradenton have been in one place longer there than any point in your life, because I moved you so much.
Yes. Yeah. Up until this last move when I was 35, I'm now 43. I had the most I ever stayed in one place was 4 years. And usually it was every 2 years that I moved. So I moved with you a lot, and then that has really tailed off as I have gotten older, and I'm among the oldest millennials. But that trend is a trend that is happening across the board. Now, there are some very specific reasons why. The Great Recession of 08 and 09 had a big part of this. I lost everything.
I remember.
Lost my entire net worth, had to liquidate my retirement just to get out from under a home loan, almost went bankrupt, barely made it out of that. And moved out of necessity, and moved with my net worth in the back of the U-Haul truck. And when I got done with that, it was basically this desire to really plant roots. And it took a couple moves to finally do that. But I had that desire of, man, I've been burned. And I've been through some very tough economic times. And honestly, I want to find a place that works for me and my family. And I just want to stick it out there. Now, who knows what God will do, and God will call people where he's going to call them. And, financial stability should not be a reason to neglect God's calling on your life. But I'm just talking in terms of principles and generalities. the Great Recession caused a lot of millennials to just really rethink things and to kind of evaluate how they want to live. And while the boomers were willing to move to kind of get that extra $5,000 or $10,000 a year with a promotion, millennials are basically looking at it and saying, I have a lifestyle I want to live, and I can do without the $5,000. Now, neither one's wrong or right. That's just a generational perspective. Sometimes it may be good to get the promotion so that you can provide better for your family. But millennials do look at things differently. And then my kids, obviously, who knows what'll happen there because they're not old enough to move around yet. But it looks like this trend will continue. It's been happening since the 1940s that mobility has decreased as middle class earning income has decreased. So that's part of this trend too. The middle class is not as strong as it was as in the 1950s.
And it will have to be exacerbated by what we're going through now. Mortgage interest rates are going up. Housing prices are settling down slightly, but they're still way above what they were a year ago in most places, certainly 2 years ago. So housing is still less affordable. About the only thing that's happening at the moment we record this is that the inventory of rental properties is going up, and that's helping a little bit on the rent prices, but everything else is more expensive.
Yeah. And work from home is a very real phenomenon. I was listening to a news report actually this morning about how other countries actually have higher return rates to work now than the United States, even Asian countries, which was absolutely fascinating because a lot of them were on lockdown. And whether or not this trend will continue to the degree in the future is yet to be determined. I do think there's going to be a lot of people going back to the office. But if you were working 5 days, you might work from the office. Now you might work 3. Work from home is here to stay. To what degree is yet to be determined, but it's here to stay. And I do think that that's going to cause people to be more inclined to stay in their current homes, particularly have a place that they like, and not move. So all of that to say, at least for the next 10 years, it's tough to predict 20 years for anything, but at least for the next 10 years, as the millennials have their children come of age, I don't see this trend changing, which is good news for your church. When they move into your community, they're more likely to stay. And if you can have them as church members, they're more likely to stick. This is good news for most communities.
And so how can we reach and keep them? What are some ways to do this? If they're sticking, how do we reach them?
Yeah, and I'll speak a little bit from personal experience here. And we do try to just give facts and not talk too much in personal anecdotes. But I think West Bradenton, my church, is a pretty good case study. Mm-hmm. We have moved away from doing a lot of events to attract people and have pushed more into programming to keep people. And it's a balance. It's a tough balance because, you have to do things to bring people into the church. You have to have an invite culture and you have to have something to invite people to. But we have positioned ourselves more as inviting people into our rhythms and patterns in our programming instead of special events. I think the boomers in particular loved the big event kind of ministry. Mm-hmm. And there was a place for it, and there still is a place for it. But we have decided that that's not going to be our default, that we're really going to focus on programming, strong programming, especially for children and students, and to really push into that weekly rhythm. And so we do Sunday morning and Wednesday night. And we just tell our people, this is when we're doing church. You need to be here Sunday morning and Wednesday night. And I know I don't want to sound like a legalist and oh my goodness, you're asking too much of people, but you know what?
You're not.
Most of our people love it.
Yes.
They love the high expectation. They love that year round there's something for them. We year round programming. Now in the summers we do summer suppers on Wednesday nights, but there's still something for people to come to on a regular basis. And it has really helped our staff, because it's easier to plan vacations and it's easier to budget, and you get into that rhythm and you know what to expect. So I would say one thing to consider is if you are heavy on the events, light on the programming, you might want to flip that around, and you might find that you get younger as a church, because when you're heavy on the events, you tend to draw in an older crowd and not a younger crowd.
Parenthetical comment here. As you go to fewer events, more programming, this falls right in line with a conversation that I had with our partners at Brown Church Development Group. By the way, if you've never heard of them, they're a design build firm that we have partnered with for quite a while. They're incredible church builders, church remodelers.
I made a recommendation just the other day. Somebody called me and said, we're looking to do something with our space. I said, you've got one call to make, and that's Brown Church Development Group.
Well, we'll put that in the show notes since we have talked about our friends at Brown, but this has implications for the building too. And if you're going to have programming, you got to ask, what is our building suited for? Because many of the boomers focused a lot of attention on the worship center, big worship centers, a lot of space, a lot of extra additions to it to making it a more event ready. And so you got to ask the question, are you ready for program? That's a parenthetical comment, but I know that when we talk to Todd and others at Brown Church Development, they say this is something that we're hearing quite often. So what about this churches being as diverse as the preschools? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So if you want to know what your church should look like in terms of ethnicity, you're probably not just allowed to just go into a preschool, but go check out, if in the safest way that you can, what are the preschools? Ask the question, what do the preschools look like in the community? And that will give you an idea of what your church should look like. And there's certain places where you can go where you can see where the community is. For us, it's the Riverwalk. If you want to get an
That's
idea
so true.
of what Bradenton really is, and how crazy Florida really is, because Florida man and Florida woman, that's a very real thing. Just go down to the Bradenton Riverwalk. There'll be all sorts of gospel opportunities on the Riverwalk, all different kinds of people. But we tend to only be around our own circles, even in a community that's diverse. And because of that, we often underestimate the diversity of our communities. Almost every county in the United States, the last census got more diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Almost every county, like 99% of counties in the United States are more diverse than they were a few years ago. The white population is declining. The only way that this country is growing is with immigrants and ethnic minorities. And by the way, we need more of that, not less, in order to sustain our economy. So the birth rates of the white community is not going to grow. We're only going to continue to decline. So we're only going to get more diverse as a nation. Now, you can think whatever you want to think about that. You may, feel a certain way about immigration, and you may want immigration to occur in a certain way. Okay, that's fine. But the reality is that if we are going to survive as a nation, and if we're going to do well as a nation economically, well, the only way to do that is with diversity. So the likelihood of your community being more diverse in the future is, it's almost 100%. And two, it's probably already more diverse than you realize because you tend to stay in your own circles. And nothing wrong with that, by the way, but it just means that you often don't see it. And so I tell my people, just go down the Riverwalk. You get an idea of what the community is.
You know how much I love the Riverwalk, don't you?
Oh, it's great.
I go to the river every time I'm in Bradenton. It's almost daily that I'm on the Riverwalk. I love that.
It is far more entertaining than any movie you could go to. Let me tell you that.
Hey, and let me mention this, Sam. We're talking about diversity in the community. We need to point our listeners and our viewers to the report that helps you to know your community. And so we're going to put a link to the Know Your Community report. Massive report, great information. You're probably going to be surprised when you read it, but let's say you decide that you want to do a 10-mile drive from your church, and all of a sudden you get this information. 10-minute drive from your church. Yeah, it is drive time. It's not miles. And you get the report and you say, I have no idea. Well, that becomes gospel opportunities right there. So we'll put the link in that because that's a very important report to look. One of the biggest surprises that people, church members, church leaders have when they look at the Know Your Community report is look at all the single parent homes. They're shocked with it. I've been with the pastor when he looked at his report for the first time and he started crying because he said, I have been gospel negligent. I did not know this demographic was as pervasive in this community as this report says.
So common. What percentage of homes with children are single parent homes in your community? Almost nobody can answer that question, but that's what the Know Your Community report will tell you. And most will vastly underestimate the single parent homes. And most communities, a lot more single moms than single dads, but please don't neglect those single dads either. We have a foster daughter in our life, and she's back with her dad, but we still get to see her a lot. She spent the night last night. She's awesome. Her dad relies on us because he's a single dad.
And he's working 2 and 3 jobs to support his daughter.
He's a good dad, but because she was in the foster system for a while, she was under our care. He does rely on us, and my wife and I were glad for that. And it's our ministry, and he's kind of family. He's a good dad, and she's a good daughter, and we get to have her around. Now this morning she was a bit of a tough cookie. We'll just
I've seen that side of her at times, but what is she? She 4 years old?
Yeah. But that's just about any child that age. The point in all of this is the way you do children's ministry is going to be very different than 50 years ago. A lot of our children's ministries are still structured for mom and dad and 2.5 kids. Mm-hmm. And that's just not what homes look like today. Now, we can bemoan that fact, and we can say, well, it should be mom and dad and 2.5 kids. I'd say, okay, a child with a mom and a dad has a much better road in front of them. No doubt about that. There's facts, there's science. We know that, but it's not reality. And so you have to meet people where they are. And most people, when they think of their churches and families and drawing families in, that's what they think of. And in reality, when you're talking about drawing in families, what you're really talking about is a lot of single parent homes. There are some communities where 60%, 70% of the homes with children are single parent homes. And that just changes the way you do ministry, because you can't rely on a mom and a dad to work in the same way that, it's just a dad or just a mom.
I have a friend who was a single mom for many, many years. She ended up marrying, and so they ended up with a blended family. But she has such a heart for single moms that she just started going around and finding out where the single moms were in the area and befriending them. She was the primary instrument to grow the church because she started having a single mom's ministry. And so you talk about wanting to reach people, grow the church, be gospel centric. Go to get that Know Your Community report and just see what the opportunity is there. Fascinating information, Sam. Again, your demographic research, many times I'm surprised at what you're finding. So I love the fact that we've got you to provide this type of insights at Church Answers. Hey, before we go, I mentioned at the beginning, Church Answers University. What is Church Answers University? It is a new kind of education and ministry training. It is for those who are unable or perhaps don't even want to go the traditional route. Instead of providing a degree, it provides something that is growing in acceptance. It is called the certification. And you can get a certification in Christian ministry. Now we have a second one, certification in women's discipleship. And it will take 9 months to a year. Just depends. It's self-paced. So it depends on how fast you want to go. And Church Answers University provides all 10 courses, self-paced, all the textbooks for each of the courses, plus we provide a very nice NLT Bible for you. And the regular tuition for this blows everybody away at $1,500, that you can have the credentials in many churches that says, I have been trained in ministry, vocational ministry. I am equipped. And so this is becoming an alternative form of new training, and typically $1,500. And that's one of the reasons why we've had so many people enrolled in Church Answers University. It's just incredibly affordable for the quality. But we have been given 5 scholarships, 50% off, 5. Sam's got it there. 50% of $1,500 is $750. We have 5 of them available. And we're going to make these available to ROL listeners because the scholarship is designated for ROL listeners. This podcast has helped a lot of people, and this is a way of someone saying thank you for what ROL has done. So how do you get the scholarship? You write Matt, M-A-T-T, at Church Answers, and tell him you want the scholarship. Now, remember, 5. First come, first serve, 5. And be prepared to be blown away at what you will get at Church Answers University. If you're interested in looking at it, just go to churchanswers.university. Sam, I think this is one of the most exciting things we've done at Church Answers, and it's getting more and more exciting.
I am thrilled about Church Answers University, and I'm thrilled that you tuned in to this episode. Thank you for listening. Don't be afraid. Be brave. Go rate, review, and subscribe. Hit that thumbs up on YouTube. Click subscribe on YouTube. You really help us out with the algorithms. And yes, we do care about that because, frankly, it helps us with our sponsors who sponsor the show because these things do cost money to produce, and you get to listen free. So if you don't mind, yeah, give us a good, if you can give us a good review. Don't give us a bad review. Who would want that? Give us a good one. Give us a thumbs up, not a thumbs down. And you know what? We'll see you on the next episode.
Hey, folks, this is a PS to our podcast. We got some exciting stuff that we want to offer you absolutely for free. Sam, when you think about predictive factors in a church's growth, if you take out demographics, what are some things that come to mind? Just two. I mean, don't give me a list of 10. Just 2 or 3 things that come to mind on predictive growth of a church.
Well, evangelism and whether the church is doing it or not.
Bingo.
And then I will add, is it an ongoing evangelism emphasis?
Double bingo. And maybe something about leadership and their commitment to that. So all of the above.
Evangelistic churches have evangelistic pastors. Is the staff, is the lead pastor doing the work themselves?
We have a free download for you, and it's actually a sheet that you can self-score. You answer 20 questions, anywhere from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And we come back and we predict what your growth rate is going to be for the next year in worship attendance. It's not a perfect tool, but it's a good tool. There's a link to that for the attendance predictor. Look in the show notes. You'll absolutely love it. That's cool. We'll see you soon.